Hey guys, tonight we slip into the glow of an ancient palace where, instead of glowing LED clocks, digital alarms, or the endless screen-swiping doom-scrolling of today, time itself is trickling away in dripping wax. Yes, you're about to be guided by candles, the softest timekeepers to ever whisper through history. Picture this. You're reclining on a cool, polished floor, the stone beneath you chilling your elbows, while a candle flickers so gently, you begin to imagine it's blinking at you, as if it knows something you don't. Asterisk now, I should be honest with you. You probably wouldn't survive very long back then. One minor inconvenience, say, forgetting to bow at the right angle to His Majesty, or sneezing on an embroidered robe band, you'd be politely removed from history, perhaps faster than a candle melts in a draft. But don't worry, you're safe here, cozy in your bed, half tucked into an era that asks nothing more of you than to quietly drift. Asterisk, so, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And one more thing. I'd love for you to comment down below your location and the local time where you're settling in tonight. Somewhere in the world. It's probably already tomorrow, but right now, we're turning back quite a few yesterdays. Asterisk now. Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Asterisk. The chamber you've entered is made of carved wood panels that smell faintly of cedar resin, warmed by the flicker of dozens of small candles. The wax glows gold and honey brown, shadows stretching across dragon motifs painted on the walls. You step inside slowly, as if the floor might sigh underneath you. The room feels alive with soft, steady breaths, the crackling of flame, the almost secretive drip-drip of wax, and the muffled rustle of robes in the next corridor. Asterisk, the Emperor you've come to see, always curious. Occasionally eccentric, wants to measure time more carefully. Sundials are hard to trust when the skies are cloudy, and water clocks, though accurate, keep springing leaks on rugs that cost more than a year's grain supply. The candle, humble as it seems, is his solution. He orders candles to be molded exactly, ribs scored down their sides like tiny rulers. Each groove is supposed to mark a set block of time. Asterisk, you move closer and notice one beside you. It's surprisingly tall, almost as high as your forearm, with marks carved evenly down the smooth wax. The air around it smells faintly sweet, beeswax warmed into something decadent. The genius of this design is simple. As the candle melts, it reveals the gradual passing of hours. You can almost imagine the Emperor watching closely, muttering to himself, as though time itself had been tamed into glowing increments. Asterisk, but here's a lesser-known detail most people forget. Candles weren't always dependable. Drafts through narrow palace windows, poorly trimmed wicks, or even over-enthusiastic servants carrying trays too close could all send time into chaotic hiccups. Suddenly, your hour might stretch like a lazy cat, or shrink faster than it takes a poet to recite a love ballad. One moment, the Emperor thinks dinner will be fashionably late, and the next, the candle insists bedtime has already come. Asterisk. Historians still debate whether this was more symbolic than practical. Did the Emperor truly believe he had locked down time with wax and Wycor? Did he simply enjoy the pageantry of watching light stand at attention? After all, what ruler doesn't love the idea that even time is obedient enough to behave in their presence? Asterisk. You wander to the edge of the room, and a draft curls around your ankles. The candle flames bend slightly, like polite courtiers bowing. You can sense how fragile this system really is. Time trembles with every gust of air, every slip of wax. If that thought makes you chuckle, well, you're not the only one. Imagine the poor servant whose job it was to swear that night's banquet had lasted 3 candles worth, only to be met by skeptical glances. Really? 3 full candles? Or just 2 and half-melted stubs? Asterisk. The floor glows with reflected light, each tile gleaming like a small pool, catching melted hours. You hear voices drifting through the corridor. The Emperor is still awake, murmuring with advisors, while the candles measure silence in steady increments. You breathe in, slow and calm, and feel time itself almost stretching out with your breath, softer and less threatening than the buzzing digital clocks of your own world. Asterisk. What strikes you most is not accuracy but rhythm. The candles coax a gentler notion of passing time patient, almost sleepy. The Emperor walks past occasionally, sighing, adjusting a robe, touching the wax. He seems satisfied, at least for tonight, that he has disciplined the invisible. Asterisk. Some small, playful part of you wonders, if you blew one out, would you technically skip an hour? Would bedtime arrive sooner? Or would you just receive a very unimpressed glare? Perhaps some curious advisor had already tested such a rebellious act, and perhaps they were quietly reassigned to candle trimming duty miles away from court. We may never know. Asterisk. Still, as you stand in that faint, glowing breath of beeswax and smoky warmth, you realize the genius wasn't in keeping precise schedules, but in bringing comfort. The candles glowed where sundials failed, whispering their own slow gospel. Life moves steadily forward, even when you're not looking. Asterisk. So you settle deeper into the moment, letting the quiet drip of wax soothe your mind as the palace breathes softly around you. Somewhere deeper in the courts, an advisor clears his throat, as if about to declare a great truth, but instead, his nose wrinkles at the smoke of a candle burning too low. Even the palace of time is susceptible to small hiccups of imperfection, and you find yourself smiling as your eyes droop, content in the imperfection of flame and hour alike. Asterisk. The Emperor finally steps into view, robes trailing like ripples of twilight silk, his face glowing with the soft orange wash of candlelight. You're caught by his expression, not the stern, chiseled profile meant for coins or tapestries, but a man leaning forward with curiosity, as though his own timepiece might whisper secrets directly into his ear. Asterisk. He pads across the chamber, slippers almost noiseless against the wooden floor. Each flicker of flame draws his gaze like a moth that aspired to the throne. He doesn't look frightened of time, which, frankly, is unusual. Most rulers prefer to ignore hours altogether, or at least bend reality by insisting a banquet scheduled for afternoon starts when they arrive, whether that happens at noon or 3 candles past midnight. But this Emperor is different. He wants to know, with precise certainty, when a meal begins and when the great philosophers have spoken for far too long. Asterisk. You step a little closer and see his hand hover above the candle clock, pausing as though he can feel the faint heat crawling up the air. He nods in approval at the wax's steady descent. He is proud of this creation, proud enough to tell courtiers, at last, we control the hours. And perhaps in moments like this, he believes it. Asterisk. But you, standing quietly out of the scene, notice all the small betrayals of wax, the droplets that fall unevenly, fat and lazy, like they've given up on punctuality, the tiny sputter when an unseen draft curls in from under a door. Even the faint wobble of a flame defies expectations. You can't help smiling at the thought. Tom is still laughing quietly at him, playing simple tricks, while he congratulates himself for victory. Asterisk. That said, his fascination isn't entirely impractical, a widely accepted historical fact. In some courts, candles marked with measured increments genuinely were used to guide ceremonies, vigils, and official tasks. Imagine the Emperor's confidence as he tells his scribes, "Write this down, a decree lasting precisely 5 candle grooves, in reading time. No longer, no shorter." The poor court secretary nods politely, while wondering why their life is now measured in flaming sticks of wax instead of quiet afternoons. Asterisk. And here's a little quirk you may not have expected. Some candle clocks were designed to drop tiny weights or balls of metal as they burned down. As each section melted, a small clink would sound against a pan, chiming the hours. So, in between important discussions about governance and grain storage, this emperor may have occasionally paused mid-sentence at the unexpected plink of a falling ball. It's reassuring to think even rulers had to deal with awkward pauses. Time announcing itself like a needy cat in the background. Asterisk. Historians still wonder whether such devices were respected as genuine instruments or merely admired for their novelty. After all, when something relies so heavily on the gentle cooperation of fire, confidence becomes a fragile luxury. Did the emperor truly expect future generations to adopt this waxy innovation? Or was he merely indulging in theatrical beauty, making time itself part of his performance of power? Asterisk. You watch him now, as he positions other candles along the polished table, squinting to see if their grooves match, grumbling softly about servants who trimmed the wicks too short. His attendants bow low, nodding with nervous smiles that probably translate into, "Yes, sire. Of course, sire. Perfect, as always, sire." You almost pity them. Living life entirely by how smoothly candles behave is a surprisingly tense way to earn your wages. Asterisk. One attendant carries a tray of half-burned candles, clearly meant for testing. They are stubby, drooping relics, and you find yourself amused by the idea of royal archives filled not with scrolls, but with waxy ends of important hours. Perhaps the emperor points to them, proudly in another chamber. This, the candle from a legendary treaty. This, the stub from a successful harvest prayer. Imagine if museums today dedicated entire wings to lumps of wax. Asterisk, but then, you remember, the emperor's fascination echoes something deeper. He doesn't just want to measure time, he wants reassurance. In a world where seasons shift unpredictably, merchants may delay, stars offer vague promises, and neighboring kingdoms lurk with uncertain motives, there is comfort in having even a flicker of control. Time is elusive, invisible, slippery as sand, and yet, here it is, contained in a candle, glowing softly on a table, he alone commands. Asterisk. The wax continues, its steady melt. The scent of beeswax thickens in the chamber, a perfume touched with smoke cozy, yet reminding you that ours are literally burning away. The emperor places his palm near the candle, almost reverential, as if absorbing confidence from the tiny flame. Asterisk. It's in moments like these, you feel that, for him, the candle is more than measurement its company. It crackles faintly, drips steadily, predicts quietly. For one ruler surrounded by bureaucracy, ceremony, and endless bowing, perhaps these candles offer honest companionship, timekeepers that neither flatter nor scheme. Asterisk. You hear one faint sputter, and a flame dances sideways before resettling. The emperor frowns but then relents, chuckling softly, as though amused that even time itself dares to wobble in his presence. In your head, you hear him mutter, "Very well. We cannot all be constant." Asterisk. It's an oddly reassuring thought, one that drapes itself softly over you as minutes fold into one another. Time wavers, but it flows on nonetheless, and in this chamber, you feel yourself quietly flowing along with it, each breath a silent groove burned into wax. The wax is close enough now that you can smell its faint sweetness, like honey left too long in the sun. Softened and a little smoky. You move closer and watch the candle clock reveal itself. What seems so simple at first glance is actually a work of craft, a miniature marvel. One candle, with lines carved straight down its body, each mark intended to measure an exact duration, grooves pressed carefully with steady hands, like tick marks on a quiet ruler that happens to glow. Asterisk. The craftsmen who made these clocks knew their waxes like a baker-nosed flower. Beeswax, richer and more perfumed, burned slower and cleaner, while tallow, poor cousin to beeswax, stank faintly of kitchens and smoke, leaving soot that clung desperately to the air. The emperor, naturally, preferred beeswax. Nothing less than honey-fed time would do. The servants, however, sometimes tested tallow versions privately when no one was looking. This explains why some records, rarely mentioned, note sudden bursts of coughing near royal experiments, and probably a few very watery eyes. Asterisk. You lean down toward one particular candle and notice its careful engineering beyond the grooves. The width is uniform from top to bottom, perfectly straight, with a wick at the core, braided from plant fibers. The wick itself has been treated, soaked in salt water, and then dried. Why? To help it burn down evenly, and to prevent that sad moment when a candle mushrooms into pools of misbehaving wax. Think of it as the haircut of the timekeeping world. A properly trimmed wick makes all the difference. Asterisk still. Even the best candle could harbor surprises. A single lump of bee pollen hidden deep in the wax might cause a sudden flare, ruining accuracy. Imagine the emperor expecting dignified consistency, only to have the 9th hour arrive with dramatic, sputtering sparks like a sleepy fireworks display. Somewhere in the corner, the candle maker quietly pretends this is part of the design. Asterisk. That's the charm, though you find yourself realizing it's not just calculation, but a mix of alchemy and performance. Candle clocks do not shout the time. They whisper it, softly tracing minutes in warm drips. In a way, you can almost regard them as the earliest mood lighting combined with scheduling software. Though, unlike your computer calendar, these candles will never send you an unwelcome 6 a.m. notification. Asterisk, a widely accepted fact across various cultures. Candles were indeed used for marking hours. Famous records mention them in ancient China, medieval Europe, even in Japan. But here's the quirk. While the emperor adored the reliability of candles in his eyes, in places like Saxon monasteries, monks cursed the devices because drafts so often skewed prayer timing. Imagine a chamber full of very grumpy monks arguing with the air itself. Asterisk. Now imagine those who traveled far arrives at this court, lifting brows at their first glimpse of a candle clock. Diplomats from lands of sundials or water clocks probably smiled politely, nodding while thinking, "Oh, how adorable." They've invented burning rulers, yet one wonders who's to say which system was truly superior. Historians still debate whether any candle clock could keep accurate measures over long durations, or if the entire enterprise was really an elaborate, glowing illusion. Asterisk. You bend down further, tracing the edges of the scored grooves with your eyes. When a flame reaches one, the heat and soft pool of melted wax almost makes that line blur. Time literally reshaped by liquid light. There's something mesmerizing about it. You don't feel rushed, unlike the digital seconds blinking sharply on your phone. These moments seem to melt into one another, pooling into calmness. Asterisk. The emperor, delighted, gestures toward you as though showing off his pet invention. His smile is not one of tyranny, but of playground joy. He really believes this tiny waxen soldier is holding back chaos. You nod graciously, partly to humor him, partly because you sense the comfort radiating off this strange contraption. Asterisk. Servants shuffle about, trimming the wicks obsessively, terrified of smoke clouding the emperor's carefully measured hour. They use tiny scissors of polished brass, tools crafted specifically for candle care, reminder that entire jobs existed for such details. Imagine telling your family, "I am employed to guard the virtue of wicks." A respectable career, though not ideal if your friends are prone to teasing. Asterisk. One servant mutters under his breath about drafty windows, blaming them for last week's argument about whether the feast ended late or early. You can't help but think, time here is less a science and more like a nervous waiter, always tripping over furniture. But in this palace, everyone plays along, because pleasing the emperor means adopting his vision that time is measurable only by glowing beeswax dissolving into the night. Asterisk. You glance at your hands. Sticky whispers of melted wax drip onto the polished tray nearby, forming tiny puddles that cool into amber skin, bumpy and textured. If you were mischievous, you might press your fingertip into one while it was still soft, leaving your mark in the Emperor's hours. Imagine an entire candle clock indented all over like graffiti, time rewritten by play rather than perfection. Historians do not report such events, but the temptation must have lingered. Asterisk, a funny thing about wax, it remembers warmth, but hardens into silence. Just like memories, you think. Tonight the wax remembers your breath in this chamber. Tomorrow, as it cools, it will look unchanged, as though you were never there. You watch time itself solidify in puddles, hush settling around the room, and realize that the quieter it gets, the more you sink inward, peaceful and aware. Slower than the drip, slower than breath. The night stretches wider now, drawing you into the palace courtyard. Candles here are not confined to chambers or scroll-lined studies. They stand proudly in lanterns along the Emperor's garden paths, glowing like patient guardians of the night. The courtyard is still, yet full of hushed music. You hear it in the faint stir of bamboo leaves, the smallest ripple of wind, and the quiet hiss of flames digesting wax. Asterisk, you pad across smooth paving stones, each one chilled from the night air. A reflection from the lanterns glosses the surface, so every step feels like you're slipping across half-melted stars. The moon is out indifferent, pale, definitely mocking the Emperor's attempts to measure time with burning wax. But tonight, it doesn't compete. It only supervises from above, letting the candles take center stage. Asterisk, you stop near a tall bronze lantern where one of the candle clocks waits. The grooves are visible, even through the metal frame, and you notice a faint shimmer of wax climbing its sides, as if the candle is eager to burst outward. Each measured drip tumbles down into a small catching tray at its base, where cooled stalagmites of old wax have piled up like miniature white towers. You picture a city within a city, each wax pillar a monument to a tiny hour that once flickered alive and then passed. Asterisk, this courtyard feels like another world compared to the Emperor's chamber. You hear the faint echo of footsteps from somewhere else through the garden, muffled in sandals. Guards' halberds glint briefly in firelight, but their expressions are bored, a little sleepy. They too are captives of these slow-burning hours. You wonder if they count time not by grooves, but by yawns. Asterisk, here's a widely accepted truth. Royal palaces were often meticulously lit, not just for grandeur, but to create a sense of security. Darkness gave way to fear of thieves, spirits, unrest. So filling the gardens with candlelight wasn't only decorative, it was a protective act, a claim of calm, and yet a lesser-known detail. Certain attendants swore the gardens whispered differently when filled with flame, as if the stone pathways themselves listened to the rhythm of wax melting. Of course, historians shake their heads at this, but you imagine it anyway. Ancient courtyards that hold time like echo chambers of light. Asterisk, as you drift closer to a pond, the reflections of lanterns shimmer gently across the water. Fish drift beneath, each slow wiggle almost timed with the candle drips above, as if pond creatures had secretly subscribed to the Emperor's clockwork ambitions. The juxtaposition makes you smile softly. You're watching goldfish, who couldn't care less about empires, mirror a timekeeping system more rigid than any sundial. Asterisk. But here comes the open question that flickers through your mind. Did anyone beyond the court truly believe in these candle clocks? Was the idea ever trusted enough to mark lives outside palace walls? Or was this simply one man's bedtime companion, a personal comfort disguised as innovation? Historians still wonder if these devices genuinely entered daily life at large, or stayed within chambers for ceremonial prestige. Asterisk, suddenly, a servant carrying a brass snuffer hurries into view, headed for a lantern that sputtered too brightly. He neatly caps the flame with a conical cover, lifts the half-burned candle, then replaces it with a fresh one from his tray. For a heartbeat, darkness presses that corner of the garden, until the new wick takes fire, stretching its thin flame like morning light, yawning awake. You realize, with some amusement, that one servant's timing could alter an emperor's sense of an hour. So in truth, power lurked not just in the throne, but sometimes in the steady hand of the night custodian of wax. Asterisk. The scents of the courtyard intermingle. Jasmine drifting across vines, roasted sesame lingering faintly from the evening's kitchen, and beeswax always beeswax slaring every breath you take. Each inhalation feels warmer for it, as though your lungs themselves are being timed by melting wax. It's hard not to feel cozy in this bubble, walking beside candle clocks that keep no pressure on you, no rush. They don't tick sharply, they don't beep, they only drip, whisper, pool, into silence. Asterisk, you glance up at the stars peeking between shifting cloud veils. They've been marking hours too, forever, with more accuracy than any candle could claim. But tonight, you find the stars allow the candles their moment, tolerating this little empire of flame. For you, it's enough to stand still, breathe gently, and let measured drips remind you how time softens when it glows. Asterisk, maybe the emperor glances out from his chamber, seeing the garden lanterns line the way like glowing chess pieces on his courtyard board. He might feel everything is balanced, every groove in place, every flame accounted for, and for once, you think he's not entirely wrong. This courtyard feels balanced, perfectly poised between silence and story, between the skies, steady hours, and fire's fragile ticks. Asterisk, you exhale, long and slow, listening to the faint ripple of a fish flicking its tail under those reflected flames. The garden whispers back with smoke and light, a language you don't quite understand but still find soothing. All you need to do is drift along with it, hour folding into hour, star folding into candle, until your own rhythm disappears into the hush of flame. The farther you wander through palace life, the more you notice something extraordinary. An entire team of attendants trailing behind the candles like nervous parents following toddlers near a staircase. The servants of the flame, as they might be grandly called though. If they were honest, professional candle babysitters would be more accurate. Asterisk, these attendants are everywhere. In the emperor's chamber, they hover with brass snuffers and trimming scissors. In the courtyard, they shuffle close to lanterns, bending carefully so sleeves don't catch fire, faces pinched tight with serious dedication. You pause to take in the scene, and suddenly realized timekeeping in this empire is less like gazing at celestial wonders, and more like a very fussy pet care routine. Asterisk, here's the widely accepted truth. The wick must be trimmed just right, or the candle begins to smoke, sputter, or tunnel into a mess. So, day and night, these servants trim, adjust, and whisper polite apologies to flames. And yes, trimming scissors were a common toulophone made of polished brass, or even silver for higher courts. Imagine the prestige of being handed your own royal wick management scissors. Perhaps these servants wore them like badges of honor, tinkling at their belts as proof their job was delicate and essential. Asterisk, the funny part, a lesser-known detail. Trimming too enthusiastically could cause the hour markings to slip entirely, because the wax melted unevenly, which meant sometimes, ironically, the servants' attempt at precision created chaos. Historians suspect there were polite arguments bubbling like candle wax. Did the banquet last 3 hours, or did the snuffer over-trim again? You smile at the thought of time itself being blamed on scissor-wielding apprentices. Asterisk, tonight, you watch one attendant lean forward, scissors glinting like tiny swords. He lowers them with a solemnity worthy of a coronation, and snips the blackened wick, letting the little ember fall into a tray. The flame straightens, taller now, brighter, ready to keep behaving. The servant bows slightly to the emperor, as if to say, all is well. The emperor nods back, pleased as, if this equal exchange of respect confirmed, the cosmos is once again aligned. Asterisk, it does strike you as strange, though, an emperor depends on candle trimmers. In this inverted order, even the smallest mistake could ruin his system. Imagine being that servant, sweating through silk collars, realizing your shaky hand might cost His Majesty's sense of precisely when to begin evening rice wine. History is full of fragile roles. Some people hold up kingdoms by building walls, others by writing decrees, and a few by trimming a wick smooth enough so time doesn't wobble. Asterisk, you pause near a servant who carries a small wooden box, its compartments filled with spare wicks, polishing cloth, even herbs rubbed into wax to keep pests away. He's proud of this kid too, can tell by the way he fusses with each tool as though it were a weapon of status. It occurs to you, with faint amusement, that this is possibly the least glamorous ancient job, and yet also one nobody dared question. The emperor may command armies, but without someone monitoring wax flow, he would feel lost in the night. Asterisk, as you watch these caretakers, you ask yourself a quiet question. Did they know the absurd weight of this responsibility? Did they chuckle at home, warning their children, don't sneeze too close to the candles, or you'll speed up imperial hours? Historians still wonder whether their lives outside the court included pride, or exhaustion, or just headaches that smelled like infinite beeswax. Asterisk, the courtyard smells heavier now, infused with smoke curls rising like sleepy ghosts into the twilight. You notice how the servants pace in rhythm, like clock hands themselves, moving through lanterns one by one, their steps precise, their gestures consistent, their devotion almost monk-like. They aren't just caring for fire, they are choreographing time, ensuring that the Emperor's illusion of order never slips into chaos. Asterisk, and then, an amusing moment, a breeze sneaks in, mischievous and cheeky, puffing out one weaker flame. Instantly, 3 servants rush forward from different directions, nearly colliding. One stumbles, another fumbles the snuffer, and suddenly, the trio transforms into an awkward ballet of panic. Finally, a wick is reignited, flame restored, and they sigh as though they've just rescued the empire from collapse. Which, to them, perhaps they have. Asterisk, the emperor, thankfully, pretends not to notice. He keeps his calm dignity, staring across the glowing garden. But you allow yourself a soft laugh under your breath, and exhale quiet enough not to disturb the order of things, because in this moment, you see how history itself often depends on the bumbling choreography of humans who are trying their best, while fire laughs in their faces. Asterisk. The wax continues its slow descent. The grooves creep closer to the flame, and you, lulled by the rhythm of trimming scissors and whispered sighs, let yourself grow warm in the thought that time itself is not harsh. With each adjustment, each droplet spilling into trays, life feels steadier, quieter, almost tender. You realize how easy it is to melt with it, to let your own edges blur into the hush, until you're not counting hours anymore. You're simply drifting like wax, folding into warmth. The night deepens, and suddenly you are swept into the hush of a feast. The great hall warms around you, walls echoing with laughter muffled under heavy wood beams and silk tapestries. You step slowly across the polished floor, your slippered feet padding quietly as you take in the sight. Long lacquered tables bend like dark rivers loaded with brass plates of steaming dishes. Bowls of rice stacked like careful pyramids, roasted meats gleaming under honey glaze, and, between every dish, a tall candle clock keeping royal watch. Asterisk, it turns out that even in the middle of merriment, time must be accounted for. The emperor insists on measuring the banquet with burning wax. It isn't enough to simply enjoy the roast duck or sip fermented plum wine, no. The exact passing of hours must be known. The candles stand like silent ushers, their glowing grooves whispering, you've eaten through one groove. No second helpings until the second groove passes. Asterisk. You take a seat near the lower end of the hall, safely out of spotlight range, but close enough to watch the dance of wax. Around you, Courtiers lift chopsticks and goblets, voices soft with practiced politeness. Nobody dares laugh too loudly without checking whether the emperor looks amused. And yet, within this stiff choreography, you feel a warm hum, the presence of immense food and firelight soothing the room into closeness. Asterisk. Here's a widely accepted fact. Banquets in imperial courts often lasted late into the night, designed not only for indulgence, but as theater, poetry reading, secret political observations, hidden in casual toasts. Here's the quirk though. The candles determined pacing. Attendants would note when one groove melted, and only then would the next dish arrive. Imagine waiting for dessert, not by appetite, but by wax decree. Even emperors had to chew at wax-speed. Asterisk. One servant hurries past with a tray, balancing candlesticks like juggling pins, replacing weaker flames with sturdier ones. Your eyes catch the hilarious seriousness of it all. Guests forced to pretend timekeeping candles are not absurd, but the pinnacle of sophistication. A diplomat from abroad stares long at a candle, tilts his head, and manages a polite ah. Most wise innovation. You can almost hear him thinking, back home we just eat when we're hungry. Asterisk. The air is thick with aromas, 5-spice drifting upward, tangy notes of pickled vegetables, the roasted sweetness of chestnuts scattered like pebbles across serving plates, and over all of it, the reliable perfume of beeswax. Everything flavors sound. Laughter is filtered through golden haze, soaked in the lazy patience of fire. Asterisk. The emperor sips delicately, eyes half closed, enjoying the sense that his invention both measures and blesses the evening. Note how diners crane necks toward each candle like impatient children, waiting for drips to announce the arrival of the next platter. Open question. Did these noble guests really enjoy this deliberate pacing? Or in private, did they sigh and whisper complaints over how slowly wax burns? Historians debate whether candle-controlled banquets were playfully symbolic, or just another way for the emperor to flex his control over indulgence. Asterisk. One official, tipsy already, watches a candle slouch under heat. It burns faster than the other one, he mutters, gesturing wildly with his chopsticks, almost losing a dumpling into his sleeve. The left table eats more quickly than we do. His neighbor shushes him, glancing toward the emperor, who pretends not to hear but hides a smile beneath his robe's edge. Even emperors enjoy a small private laugh when time embarrasses their ministers. Asterisk. Candles drip. The hall hums, conversations ebbing and flowing like tides. More plates arrive. Steaming buns filled with lamb, a broth glowing golden with floating herbs, small cakes dusted with sugar that spark against your tongue like snowfall. Each dish is framed by flamelight, each laugh softened by its warmth. Its feast not simply as consumption, but as ritual rhythms measured, hours melted, bellies filled in harmony with wagging firelight. Asterisk. As you sit, warmth pulls through you. Flickering shadows trace over the painted beams above, where dragons curl their tails endlessly, watching mortals indulge beneath measured time. You sip from a small cup of warm rice wine, the heat blossoming low in your chest. If this is how ours pass off flames determining when to move from noodle to sweet fruit slicer. Grateful for the slowness. Asterisk. Now imagine for a moment, what if the candle burned unpredictably fast? Would dessert arrive instantly? Guests hurried into sugar before appreciating the meat course. Or worse, what if it crawled slower than a snail at dawn, leaving hungry guests staring for eternity at sealed trays? Somewhere in history, surely. These debates occurred entire evenings shaped by the whimsy of flame speed. Asterisk. Tonight, though, everything aligns. Every dish arrives at steady tempo. Laughter swells and decrescendos in rhythm with grooves. Your eyelids grow heavy in this rhythm too, as though your own appetite is tethered to wax, drifting into half-sleep between bites. The emperor raises a final toast, his sleeve brushing candlelight. The flames respond by bowing into longer shadows. stretching across the hall until everything seems softened, slowed, blurred into golden haze. Asterisk, you breathe in once more, letting roasted sesame and beeswax mingle in your chest. A banquet of hours, indeed, Trame, a polite conductor, guiding you toward fullness and peace. And though the feast continues, though voices still ripple around you, you feel the night lowering its shoulders, slumping into deeper calm. Time itself is a guest here, invited, slowed, and fed until all that remains is the glow of drips easing everyone gently forward. The banquet slips away behind you, fading like steam from a kettle into the palace's quieter corridors. Full of warmth and beeswax-scented air, you turn down a hall, toward a different chamber. It's quieter here, lined with bookshelves so tall they seem built for giants or very, very ambitious librarians. This is the palace library, though not the sort full of dust and stern rules. No, this one is alive with flame and scrolls. A glowing labyrinth where time is measured as much by wax drips as by words. You wander slowly, between shelves stacked with bamboo slips tied in cords, parchments rolled into neat tubes, and silk screens painted with ink that hasn't yet faded despite its age. Yet what strikes you are not the texts themselves, but how every desk and corner is illuminated by candle clocks. The scholars here measure their reading, their writing, and even there yawns by the grooves of wax. You pause at one table now, where a candle burns steadily above a parchment covered in brush calligraphy. The candle's groove slides lower, announcing the silent passing of another fraction of an hour. You look at the scholar bent over his work, his long sleeves pulled on the desk. He isn't watching the letters anymore. His eyes are fixed on the pool of melted wax, as though hypnotized. Don't judge him too harshly. You'd probably be distracted too, if your deadline depended on a melting stick of honeyed light. Here's the accepted fact. In many traditions, candles in libraries or studies were used deliberately as limiters of time. The flame provided light, but also pressure work until the candle burned to a certain point, then stop. It's like the earliest focus timer, except without obnoxious alarm bells or reminder apps, pinging you at midnight out. Now for a quirkier detail. Some libraries recorded wax levels right into their notes. Margins on scrolls might have small doodles marking finished before second groove, almost like sticky notes reminding future readers how long work took. Did these notes have scientific rigor? Absolutely not. But they capture something intimate, a record of how one scholar measured personal time with wax, an hour immortalized in glow. You glance around and swear you can almost see their ghosts here, leaning over parchment. Time melting in tandem with ink. The Emperor drifts into this space too, robes sweeping like a curtain across the tiled floor. He peers down at the candles approvingly, as if checking whether scholars are truly keeping pace. They pretend to be completely devoted to scrolls. But you notice twitching eyes sneaking sideways, praying their candle doesn't betray them by sputtering shorter than expected. After all, if His Majesty insists you've only studied half a candle's worth, there's not much you can argue. You lean over one particular parchment lying open, a philosophical puzzle, elegantly brushed lines curling across the page. The scholar who wrote it clearly paused, mid-thought, an ink spot growing large at the center of the page. Perhaps that the candle distracted them at the crucial moment. Was that failure or inspiration of some other kind? Historians still debate whether these candle-driven study habits encouraged true rigor, or simply produced bleary-eyed scholars guessing at wisdom after midnight. The air here is dense with overlapping scents, musk of old ink, crisp dryness of bamboo slips, and that unshakable beeswax perfume mingled with faint smoke. You feel it in your chest, a weight not heavy at all, but instead grounding, a reminder to breathe in deeper, slower, softer. You like to think the scholars absorbed rhythm, not just from texts, but from this steady inhalation of warmth and word together. One servant slips along the shelves, holding a tray to catch stray drips. He's less like a flame babysitter tonight, and more like a custodian of ideas, making sure drops don't melt onto irreplaceable scrolls. Imagine that panicked centuries of thought, erased by a clumsy wax blob. You find yourself at once relieved and slightly amused that human history, for all its triumphs, could have been smudged because someone sneezed too close to a candle. Open question. Were these candle clocks ever truly trusted to guide academia in profound ways? Or were they mostly symbols? Something dignified to wave in conversation. My essay took 7 grooves of wax to complete, while real inspiration came from sleeplessness and tea. Historians leave that debate smoldering, because truth often dissolves as quickly as wax. You take a slow step back, looking at the chamber filled with breathing light. Shadows ripple across the shelves, long and inky. They swing gently, as though book spirits are stretching after centuries. The hush is persuasive, coaxing your own breath to match the candle's pace. Pause slow, steady, no rush. It feels less like studying and more like cradling time. As you linger there, you realize what the Emperor truly loves, that life, framed by flame, becomes tolerable. He can trace hours, not as lost minutes, but as melted triumphs. And you feel your thoughts steady, your body soften, as if the library itself is teaching you its secret lesson, that knowledge grows best when time is allowed to melt quietly, at its own drowsy pace, into golden stillness. You step outside once again, leaving behind the hushed whispers of the candlelit library. The air is cooler now, laced with the earthy fragrance of the palace courtyards. But your path pulls you farther still, to the outer markets. And here, at last, you witness one of history's most overlooked but vital dramas, the commerce of candles. Asterisk. The Emperor may delight in candle clocks, but without constant supplies of wax and wick, his great illusion of controlled time would sputter out in less than a week. So you wander slowly into the marketplace lanterns overhead, awnings pulled tightly against the night mist, and merchants hawking honeycombs, bundles of herbs, glistening oils, and, stacked proudly in neat pyramids, golden bricks of beeswax. Asterisk, yes, beeswax, the secret currency of punctuality. You pause before a stall, where bricks are carved into rounded ingots, gleaming like amber treasure. Run your palm over them, they feel soft, almost oily, and smell faintly of summer fields. They're heavier than you expect to, as if each block of wax carries not only sunlight from bees, but also the weight of possible hours yet to come. Asterisk. Here's the widely accepted truth. Beeswax candles were always coveted. They burned longer and more cleanly than tallow, producing gentle light and much less smoke. And they smelled sweet, a fact not lost on emperors, who preferred elegance even in their timekeeping. Ordinary people, meanwhile, often relied on smokier, cheaper fats for lamps. The difference was stark. Palace time smelled of honey. Village time, more like kitchens and firewood. Asterisk. That's not the end of the story though. A lesser-known quirk. In some regions, merchants used beeswax as a kind of flexible bargaining tool. One candle's drip of time could be tossed lightly in conversation to describe appointments, debts, or distances. Some traveling traders even joked that wax was more reliable than counting the stars, though less forgiving if you left it sitting in the sun too long. Asterisk. You drift deeper into the candle market. Tall racks display molded varieties trimmed into defined grooves, promising dependable hours. One merchant yells proudly that his candles are guaranteed accurate. Within the radius of a reasonable gust of wind, he smiles with gaps in his teeth, admitting indirectly what everyone knows. Fire is charmingly unreliable. Still, he manages to sell enough wax to fund his evening wine. Asterisk. And here's an open question historians still puzzle over. How extensive was this wax trade really? Did regional markets thrive on it the way they did on spices or silk? Some argue that beeswax roots stretched surprisingly far, while others think only local production sustained candle clocks. Either way, watching these stalls, you feel the immense dependency of a palace system of timekeeping built entirely on the labor of bees. The hands of farmers, the trade of merchants, and the endless snipping of attendants. A whole empire measured not in battles or fortresses tonight, but in wax. Asterisk, you pause at a stall where an older woman sells smaller candles wrapped in cloth. These aren't meant for imperial clocks. They're for night reading, or guiding children to bed, or praying at tiny shrines. She speaks softly to a customer, explaining how each one is dipped 8 times, layer by layer, until the proper thickness is achieved. You imagine how her steady hands, somewhere on the edge of empire, contribute silently to the same cycle. The emperor treasures her craft, ensuring that time keeps glowing inside marbled halls she may never see. Asterisk. The scents of the market wrap around you, honey, pungent oils, and roasted chestnuts nearby. Voices rise and fall, deals whispered, laughter spilling casually. The candles glimmer in the dark, like little soldiers melting into usefulness. Their glow softer than the stars above. Asterisk, and you can't help thinking with some dry amusement. Imagine if your paycheck today were delivered in wax blocks, instead of direct deposits. Heavy bricks of golden beeswax stacked at your door, smelling faintly of summer hives. Banks would need warehouses filled with softly melting treasure, and every financial collapse would be called a wax shortage. Asterisk, but jokes aside, as you stroll toward the edges of the market, you feel the collective hum. Candles here are not just objects, they are potential hours, potential memories, potential dreams, each one an unwound script waiting to be melted into someone's life. The emperor may think he invented the grand system of wax-measured time, but all around you tonight, ordinary people carry it too, balancing their bundles like farmers walking home with pocket-sized sons. Asterisk, and so you walk with them, the market buzzing behind you, arms filled with the warm scent of honey and history, as candles continue to glow gently into your path. Small lanterns that remind you, time is not a ruler shouting orders, but a flicker dancing quietly, traded in markets and carried tenderly home. The hum of the market drifts away as you step softly into a quieter part of the city, a temple complex tucked into a fold of the hills. It is late, that time of night when everything feels more like breathing than activity. The air here is cooler still, tinged with incense smoke, perfumed wood, and yes, candles again. But this time, the wax burns not to measure banquets or study hours, nor to line a merchant's purse, but as offerings of devotion. Asterisk, the temple courtyard spreads wide, stone paving gleaming faintly with dew. Rows of lanterns hang from wooden beams, their interiors each cradling a tall candle, whose hours are dedicated not to emperors, but to saints, gods, or ancestors. You find yourself slowing, reverently, instinctively tugged into the hush of soft flame. The light is steady, less hurried than in the palace, less fussed over than in the court. Here, time feels not controlled, but surrendered. Asterisk, you step forward, pausing at a shrine where a priest adds a new candle, bowing as he lights the wick. It's a simple ritual, flame rising, hands folded, but the gesture ripples effortlessly through the temple. One candle is replaced, and an entire hall of worshippers exhales, as though soothed by this reminder that night continues, that prayers still march on, groove by glowing groove. Asterisk, here's a widely accepted fact. Candles have long bridged the practical with the spiritual. They illuminated chants, guided monks at vigils, and stood as metaphors for fragile human lives, burning away in time. Yet, in this temple, they are something more. They are calendars, offerings, whispered intentions disguised as light. Each flame counts, as deliberately as an hourglass, but with more tenderness. Asterisk, a lesser-known quirk. Tucked into obscure accounts, some candles here were embedded with faintly colored threads in the wax. As the candle melted, the threads emerged at intervals, signifying moments for chanting or bowing. Imagine bending low, not because a clock tells you it is now 2 a.m., but because a thread of red appeared in wax, glowing faintly as if lit from within. A system both beautiful and a little magical, part timekeeping, part poetry. Asterisk, you watch worshippers kneel one by one, their shadows dipping across the stone floor. The flames cling to their shapes, stretching and bending with every movement, as if the candles themselves participate in prayer. One devotee lingers a long while, staring into the flicker until their own face softens, breath sinking to the glow. The hours here are not rigid. They melt into streams of devotion, unconcerned with precision. Content instead, with rhythm, the steady drip of wax, the low murmur of voice, the tender cracking of incense. Asterisk, an open question floats through you. Did those in this temple truly believe that the candle measured divine time? Or did they know perfectly well that wax is erratic, drafts bend flames, wicks misbehave, but choose to treat its flaws as sacred anyway? Historians still wonder, where does ritual stop and measurement begin? Was it spiritual clockwork, or simply symbolism cloaked in light? Asterisk, a priest passes by, sleeves brushing the floor, and offers you a narrow smile. He nods toward a tall row of candles, some already half burned, their wax pooling into rivulets along carved stands. They look like rivers of time, glowing highways leading into mystery, and for a soft moment, you imagine yourself as one of those rivulets, flowing down, cooling gently, leaving behind only a soft trace of light. Asterisk, inside the main hall, statues rise tall, bathed in a blurred glow that makes them feel alive, their eyes glinting faintly in flame. You kneel instinctively, not because anyone commands you, but because the space feels thick with presence, wax and silence working together to press the very air into reverence. You breathe slowly, filling your lungs with scent, and hear your heart fall in step with the faint hiss of a wick. Asterisk, the Emperor. He would be fascinated here. He might even approve candle clocks used this way, to chime prayer times, or measure chants. But he would also smirk at how imprecise it all is, how casually the temple accepts melted grooves as divine. You, however, find the imprecision comforting. Time no longer drills into minutes or courses through decrees, simply drips, softly, steadily, into pools of devotion that grow cool under moonlight. Asterisk, the temple quiets further as the night goes on. Worshippers slip out, their robes whispering across stone, leaving only flames bowing their necks in the breeze. You linger, resting eyes on one candle nearly finished, its final groove hissing alive. As its flame gutters, time itself exhales alongside it, and the temple folds deeper into silence, leaving nothing but glowing warmth that tells you, not all hours need precision, some hours need only softness. The temple's whispering silence fades into another kind of murmur, this time, voices in a private chamber, where scrolls are unfurled, tea is poured, and the smoke of beeswax spirals lazily upward. Scholars, gathered in long sleeves, and occasionally drooping hats, argue quietly, their words punctuated by the sips of steaming green tea, and of course, the reluctant give and take of candlelight. Asterisk, you slip into the room, taking a seat barely noticed by the group, though one older scholar spares you the quickest nod of recognition, as though you're another apprentice who will learn something important tonight. The table is long, stacked with inkstones, brushes, damp cloths for scribbles, papers rolled and re-rolled, but the real centerpiece, a line of trembling candles, hour-marked, grooves carefully scored, each one burning with an air of authority entirely undeserved. Asterisk, the scholars are debating, of course, what these clocks actually mean. One raises a brush to make his point more theatrical. The candle burns at a rate as steady as the breath of nature itself. he declares, face shining pink under the flame. Another scholar, rolling his eyes so hard his pupils nearly orbit, replies, steady, unless a door opens, unless a breath passes crooked, unless the wick misbehaves. Wax, my friend, does not love discipline. Asterisk you pause, letting this settle. It's true, a widely accepted fact. Candle clocks were always prone to quirks, never perfect, always a little stubborn. While they offered comforting rhythm, they were hardly true instruments in the strict sense, and the scholars know it. To one side, a man nods. Water clocks at least drip evenly, he mutters. But wax is moody. Asterisk, then comes the delightful, quirky detail. One scholar swears that certain recipes of wax, infused with oils or herbs, could make the flames sing. Literally, he leans forward, whispering conspiratorially, a thin whistle, soft but steady, when the wick meets rosemary soaked into wax. The others chuckle politely, though one raises a skeptical brow. Did such singing candles ever exist? Or was this man desperately seeking attention after too much tea? Historians still wonder. No clear mention survives. But just allow yourself a second to imagine a choir of candles humming through nocturnal libraries. Asterisk. The room fills with laughter, gentle, not sharp. You see the camaraderie, the soft mocking. Scholars caught between reverence for science and affection for absurdity. They laugh because nobody truly knows whether the emperor is right in his great defense of wax. They laugh because the thing supposed to channel order has its own agenda. And what is scholarship if not poking fun at the universe's refusal to comply? Asterisk, as a breeze slips under the door, two candles waver nervously. Ah, look, there, says one scholar, pouncing upon the tiny flicker. Already 3 minutes stolen by a draft. Another tallies it into his scroll, marking lost time as if documenting a robbery. Their earnestness makes you smile. Imagine writing. Very seriously, the 23rd hour was stolen by a mischievous breeze. Asterisk, one more soft sip of tea passes around, the liquid cooling quicker than expected. Meanwhile, the candles keep their slow procession downward. Shadows slip along walls, crawling like sleeping animals from one side to another. The voices grow more tired as the night thickens, yet still they argue, unwilling to surrender to silence before making yet another comparison to stars, or sundials, or the heart's pulse, as one dreamy scholar offers. Asterisk, and here, too, your mind drifts toward the emperor. Would he laugh if he overheard such bickering? Or would he banish them from his sight for failing to treat his candle clocks as flawless? Historians still ask, did rulers prefer the pleasing illusion of control, while scholars privately poked every hole in it? Perhaps candle hours were never meant to be true measures, at lonely metaphors for fragile order in a chaotic world. Asterisk. The debate softens as exhaustion creeps in. Brushes lie forgotten by inkpots, scrolls curl up where they've been left, and a few scholars tilt dangerously close to nodding off against their own sleeves. One candle gutters with dramatic defiance, wax spilling, flame diving sideways. The room chuckles once more, then yawns. For all their seriousness, the scholars know the joke belongs to the candle. Time, slippery as ever, refuses to declare a single victor. Asterisk, you sit still, lulled by the blend of candle hiss and the occasional clink of porcelain cups. And you realize that knowledge never comes like lightning, hear it, comes like dripping wax. Slow, luminous, and punctuated by mistakes. You let that truth sink into your bones. The more you listen, the softer your mind flows, until you, too, are no longer part of the argument, but part of the slow drip of silence that takes over the chamber. The air of scholarly debate fades. You drift away from the chamber of scribes and candles, stepping once again into the shifting hallways of the palace. Somewhere in the distance, laughter still lingers faintly from the banquet, but your path takes you closer to the gates, toward the outer courtyards where diplomats and foreigners occasionally arrive. Tonight, however, you linger in a space shimmering with echoes of journeys because this is where weary travelers encounter royal candle clocks for the very first time. Imagine them explorers, merchants stepping into an audience with the emperor. They've brought maps, trinkets, maybe a gift too extravagant to carry long distances. They've dressed in their best silks, woven cloth, or coats dyed with berries from homelands far away. They've crossed rivers, deserts, seas, and now they stand here, in the hush of a court blazing with candles marked with grooves. Utterly confused, you hover with them, blending into their group, watching their eyes dart from one flame to another. A Korean envoy frowns slightly, calculating, then whispers to an assistant. So, the wax falls, and time obeys. An envoy from Persia chuckles beneath his breath, clearly polite but skeptical, muttering something that sounds very much like, "Back home, our hourglasses don't depend on the mood of fire." This confusion isn't surprising, a widely accepted fact. Methods of measuring time varied wildly depending on region. Sundials flourished in some lands. Water clocks ticked steadily with dripping droplets in others. And in yet more places, the stars themselves were the only reliable calendar. For many, seeing authority vested in an object as fragile as wax must have seemed surreal. And yet enter the quirky detail. Some accounts describe foreigners being so fascinated that they requested candle clocks to bring home with them. Imagine trying to explain to your hometown audience, this is a ruler's timepiece. Yes, all you need is bees, plenty of wax, steady hands, and no drafts whatsoever. Trust me, it works. Sometimes, history doesn't record whether these travelers succeeded in impressing their peers, but you like to think one candle landed in an unfamiliar port, sputtering suspiciously as locals tilted their heads. The open question, one still left to historians, was this exchange genuine adoption or courteous acceptance? Did outsiders really believe in its accuracy? Or did they nod and smile, simply because emperors don't like being told their inventions look silly? You can imagine the pained expressions of envoys trying desperately to keep their faces neutral while watching attendants hover anxiously over fire like it's a prize racehorse. You lean on the doorway now, watching the mixture of awe and polite doubt framing these visitors. Their silks reflect gently in the candle glow, colors bending in amber halos. Their voices hush as the emperor enters, robes trailing once again, his hand confidently brushing against the flame nearest to him. He glances at the foreign guests, as if daring them to challenge his authority over ours. Nobody does, of course. They bow, very low, faces hidden just long enough for one or two to roll their eyes privately, invisible beneath the floorboards of etiquette. You suppress a chuckle, because really, isn't that how half of diplomacy works? Nod courteously, pretend the candle is flawless, then whisper your doubts on the journey home. The room itself joins in this soft comedy. A candle sputters slightly, dripping too quickly, and a servant rushes to adjust it. The ambassador from India raises a brow, but politely turns it into a cough. Another flame leans out dramatically as a draft slides in, and the envoy closest to it shifts uneasily, as though wondering if time itself has just gone off balance beneath his sandals. Yet no one dares question aloud. That's the brilliance of candle clocks in court life. They weren't just instruments. They were theater. To dispute them would have been to challenge the emperor's show. And everyone knows, in both ancient courts and modern office meetings, challenging the performance is rarely worth it. You drift along with the envoys as they're guided, outside to toast and dine under lanterns. They nod politely at the grooves scored down the wax. They smile at the flicker of flames sinking with coursers. But you know in your heart, each one is walking away with wildly different stories. Some will record the Emperor's brilliance. Others will chuckle privately. A few may try to replicate the enchantment back home. And one or two, maybe, will daydream about a simpler truth, that time doesn't need to burn itself to be noticed at all. For now, though the courtyard glows with diplomatic performance, wax pools quietly at the bases of lantern trays, melting into foreign soil, into shared stories, into the kind of memory that bridges the gap between faith, doubt, and wonder. And you, part of the group without an embassy to report to, simply fall into the rhythm of night, letting the flickering grooves wash softly over you, amused by the world's many ways of pretending ours behave. The embassies retreat into the night, their polished silks and whispered doubts carried away like drifting embers. You, however, linger within the Empire's heart just a little longer, and tonight feels special. The evening coincides with a festival, one of those luminous times of the year when the palace and the city beyond glow so brightly that even the moon seems humbled. Asterisk. You step into the grand avenue leading to the festival grounds. Lantern poles tower above, their crossbeams strung with hundreds of paper lanterns, each pulsing with a small candle inside. From a distance, the street already looks like a dragon uncoiling, a body of glowing scales winding into the night. Families gather beneath the lights, stepping carefully on cobblestone, holding hands, whispering soft hopes into the air as if the lanterns might catch them like floating messages. Asterisk, this is no ordinary celebration. Here, candles stretch farther than timekeeping chores, farther than temple devotion, into the world of spectacle. Entire rows of candle clocks, yes, even hair are staged along the festival entrance, as though every party needs built-in accounting of the hours. They stand proudly, half ceremonial, half whimsical, grooves scored so guests can watch the progression of the night. But really, no one cares whether each groove is accurate. What matters tonight is the glow. Asterisk, here's a widely accepted fact. Festivals in such courts, often centered around displays of light, candles, braziers, meant both to banish the long night and enchant the gathered crowd. Fire made a city feel like heaven briefly descended, and yes, the Emperor would appear, delighted to see his candle clocks among the festivities, as though his personal obsession had been woven into communal joy. Asterisk. Now the quirk. Some lantern competitions encouraged elaborate carved wax molds. Imagine not just straight pillar candles, but dragons, flowers, even miniature palaces, all crafted from wax, set aflame to astonish spectators. The trick, of course, was that most melted into comical slumps far too quickly. Children giggled, while noble artisans winced as carefully sculpted swans ended up looking like unfortunate puddles. Somewhere in the back, though, a poet always claimed, see, the impermanence of beauty is the very point. That's the advantage of poetry. You can spin any failure into wisdom. Asterisk. And still, one open question floats, unanswered even by historians. Did festivals like this truly measure hours with wax grooves? Or did they only borrow the imagery, the illusion of precision, draped over what was essentially one enormous party? Likely, it was both. Scholars argue that candle clocks during festivities were symbolic gestures, more like stage props than serious instruments. The Emperor, however, strolled through glowing streets, convinced time itself joined in his parade. Asterisk. You make your way into the bustling square, surrounded by sounds of drums, laughter, the coy clink of vendors selling skewered sweets. Sugar melts in kettles, sesame cakes glisten. Steam rises from dumpling baskets. Candles light every stall, every performance corner. A troupe of dancers sways in luminous silk, glimmering as flames catch on their sequins. Children run ahead with tiny lanterns, shaped like rabbits and fish, tugging their parents along the glowing path. Asterisk off to one side, an entire corridor of candles stands lined up against painted screens. their shadows projected into delicate moving pictures. Dragons crawl across walls, phoenixes take flight, all conjured by nothing more than patient wax and clever cutouts. A group of musicians performs nearby, the soft pluck of strings weaving strangely well with the sigh and hiss of burning wicks. The Emperor appears to processing down the avenue. His robe is layered with golden embroidery that seems to shimmer and wink at the flames themselves, perhaps daring the candles to be out. He looks pleased. The people bow quickly, but the bowing doesn't last, they're too enchanted, rising again to marvel at the constellation of lanterns dangling overhead. Even the Emperor cannot compete with this chorus of small suns. And you, drifting with the crowd, feel time lose its sharpness entirely. No more grooves, no more anxieties over accuracy. The candles tonight do not police ours, they scatter them like fireflies. Each flame is less a marker than a melody, each glowing lantern a verse in one long song of light. Children dart past you, chasing glowing shadows. Lovers whisper beneath lanterns. Poets mutter lines they'll forget by morning. Wax continues to melt in every corner, unnoticed, unmeasured. You too, let yourself relax into this uncountable moment, where all you need to do is glow with the crowd, unhurried, warmed by fire that doesn't just keep time, but carries joy. Above you. Lanterns drift gently in the breeze, each one a calm heartbeat, each one a reminder that even measured hours deserve nights, when precision slips softly into play. By the time the festival's glow begins to soften, the night has grown heavy and still. Lanterns flicker their last, laughter thins into tired murmurs, and you follow the trail of quiet flame back into the palace itself. Here, after so much celebration, a curious little chamber awaits, a room where innovation gathers dust, and where old rivals for attention brood silently. This is the Hall of Devices, a tucked-away corner of the palace where various versions of timekeeping machines are stored. The Emperor, for all his candle devotion, is still curious about how others measure time. And so here they are. Water clocks, sand timers, sundials, relocated indoors for demonstration. The mood inside is like a family reunion, no one wanted each contraption simmering in its own form of resentment, each one silently glaring at the others. You stop at a tall bronze water clock in the center. Drips tumble into a basin with surprising grace, echoing in the dark. It's consistent, dependable, patiently recording passage with a rhythm nobody questions. A widely accepted fact. Water clocks have been used across many civilizations, often remarkably accurate. Yet here in this court, they sulk in a corner, overshadowed by the Emperor's beloved candles. Next to it, sits an hourglass tall, slender, full of sand so fine it looks like silken grains. Flip it, and marvel at the steady drizzle. But watch closely. Occasionally moisture clumps the stream, pausing the flow, skewing the hour entirely. A scholar nearby has scribbled a note, reliable, until the sand grows moody. You snort softly, recognizing the same temperamental reputation candles endure. The quirkier detail here, amid these rivals sits a contraption few would expect. A candle combined with an alarm feature. Strings were embedded in the wax, and as the flame melted down, it released tiny weights causing bells to jingle or pebbles to clatter in a tray. Imagine the charm and absurdity. Rulers jolted awake by a plink declaring time. Servants rushing to announce that wax had spoken. Picture oversleeping at court because a wick sputtered out early, or, worse, ringing bells half an hour too soon. Historians still wonder whether these innovative hybrids were practical or mostly curiosities, trotted out for show before returning to dusty shelves. Was any one candlebell system truly the Emperor's alarm clock? Or was it just a novelty to amuse his scholars after too much plum wine? Nobody knows. But But as you stare at the quiet collection, you sense centuries of rivalry between the water and the flame, the sand and the wax. Asterisk, the room smells faintly metallic, bronze and copper mixed with stale wax residue. Shadows fall heavily on walls lined with faded banners, faded, in part, because someone once placed candles far too close to silk. Another servant blunder, immortalized in shadowy scorch marks. It's humbling, you think, an entire empire, proud of its timekeeping, yet its relics look faintly weary, tucked in like old actors between performances. Asterisk, the emperor, you imagine, sometimes brings guests here to parade his candle clocks against these rivals, his voice booming, sleeves fluttering, proclaiming, water leaks, sand falters, stars hide, but my wax, loyal and golden, burns before your very eyes. Guests would clap politely without daring to note the drafts causing his very demonstration candle to sputter sideways. Asterisk, you smile at the pettiness of it. Each system drip, grain, flame has its confidence, its flaws, its defenders, and isn't that the most human thing? Time itself is perfect, steady, unstoppable. But humans, we wrangle, fuss, argue, build devices that stutter and sing, hoping to cage something wild. Every clock is just a metaphor, really. Is time water slipping, sand spilling, flame melting? It is all and none. It doesn't confess to a single box. Asterisk, as you linger, you find yourself oddly affectionate toward this room. Each device is imperfect, flawed, stubborn, and that makes them relatable. You think, tenderly, that human beings themselves are just candle clocks with unreliable drafts. Sundials always hoping for sun, hourglasses that sometimes clump. You exhale softly, realizing that perhaps time wasn't meant to be measured so fiercely in the first place. It was meant to remind us of imperfection, and that imperfection can still glow. Asterisk, one final candle stands in the corner of the hall, nearly forgotten. Its grooves are unevenly cut, a practice piece maybe, never meant for display. Yet its flame burns softer than all the others, wobbling but warm. You stand there, letting it melt at its own lopsided pace, time in no rush at all, and slowly, sitting with these forgotten rivals, you realize you've joined them, two not competing, not tallying grooves, not striving for precision, just melting quietly into the same warm night. You leave behind the hall of devices, lamps dimming in your footsteps, until the air grows cooler, less perfumed, and more honest. Ahead are the provinces, the quieter corners of the empire, far from polished courts and scholarly debates. Here, no one whispers about whether a candle grooves too quickly or too slow. Here, peasants mend roofs, hush children, brew tea, and glance only occasionally at stubby little candles sputtering nearby. Asterisk, step into a humble farmhouse now. The floor is packed earth, patched with reed mats. The walls are marked by smoke and laughter. At the center sits a family's candle. It leans slightly. Its wax, not beeswax, but tallow, scent smoky, edges rough from repeated relightings. It is not majestic. It is not scored with grooves. It isn't overseen by trembling servants. It is only practical. A stub that flickers on a clay saucer, telling time in stumbles and guesses. Asterisk, widely accepted fact. Peasants rarely enjoyed the clarity of beeswax candles, as the court did. Ordinary people improvised tallow from animals, oil lamps fueled by sesame, sometimes torches of pine wood resin. Luxuries of clean, honeyed light belonged to officials and temples. But still, across the provinces, candles, even the humblest, were crucial companions of night. Asterisk, the quirky detail you see here. Families sometimes saved the last dribbles of wax to patch tools or seal containers. Imagine reusing time itself, folding its melted remnants into another day's chores. A peasant child might even mold the drips into animal shapes, laughing as their tiny lion leans sideways and loses a leg. In this home, Time wasn't worshipped or debated. It was melted, scooped, and reshaped. Too busy to bother with absolute grooves. Asterisk, you sit with the family as they eat an evening meal. Rice, vegetables, perhaps a scrap of fish. The candle burns faintly nearby. Nobody is counting grooves. They are counting bites, counting stories. An elder tells a tale of a fox that tricked a farmer. A child interrupts with giggles. Their little flame flutters, caught in their laughter. Time is measured, not by wax lines, but by how long the child's grin lasts. How far the story stretches before sleep, asterisk. Historians still wonder whether such modest households cared at all about official time imposed by imperial candle clocks. Did proclamations about standard hours truly matter here? Or was the empire's obsession with precision simply background noise, faint as a rumor, whispered down long rivers? If you asked the peasants, perhaps they'd shrugged. Hours. They watch the sun rise, the pigs grumble for their breakfast, the candle stub melt down. That is time enough. Asterisk. Step outside the farmhouse, and you'll see the wider province glowing faintly. Village shrines carry candles, too small, humble flames enclosed in bamboo casings, lighting evening prayers when darkness presses harder. Out here, the flames waver more boldly in wind. People accept it. No frantic servants rushing, no emperor frowning. Just life, shaped by wax that burns in its own stubborn rhythm. Asterisk, and it's funny, you think. In the Grand Palace, time was controlled by an army of attendants, debated endlessly, tethered to power. Here, it is simply a stub in the dark that says, eat quickly before it's gone. Finish stitching your robe. Tell the story before the wax melts. Time is simpler, rawer, perhaps even truer. Asterisk, you walk farther, through villages lining rivers, provinces, tucked between terraces. Each household has its own stubby flame. Together, they look like constellations fallen, to earth, hundreds of small lights pooling across the countryside. The emperor's clean, golden grooves might never reach here, but light does, humble and wavering, enough to soften shadows and carry families into sleep. Asterisk, in this twilight, you feel kinship not with courtly grooves or devices, but with farmers reusing drips of wax, turning their hours into playthings or patches. They teach you something quietly subversive. Time is not an emperor's possession to measure and decree. Time belongs to whomever lives it, shaped by stubby flames and laughter, molded into tools, spoiled by drafts, collected into stories before bed. Asterisk, you sit again in the farmhouse doorway. The candle sputters low, giving its last breath into darkness. The child cuddles close under a patched quilt. The family sighs into soft rest, and you, lulled by their rhythm, almost forget that somewhere beyond the hills, a ruler is still counting grooves with officials. Here, the stub fades without drama, and yet somehow, this feels like the truest way that hours are meant to vanish, into the hush of a quiet room, carrying warmth and dreams instead of decrees. The farmhouse quiet dissolves as you wander back toward the palace heart one more time. Gone are the markets, the temples, the scholars' bickering voices hall. That remains is the hush of the emperor's chamber, late at night. The towering doors creak softly as you push them open, and inside, the room is swaddled in deep shadows. Only a single candle clock burns near the center, its wax surrendering inch by inch, flame bending lower, growing tired. Asterisk, the emperor sits quietly beside it. There is no retinue now, no parade of servants trimming wicks in a flurry, no scholars scribbling notes, just him and the candle. He stares deeply at the last segment, watching patiently, as if every tiny drip carries the weight of the empire. You lower yourself onto a polished cushion at the edge of the room, the floor cool against your hands, and for a moment, you two lock eyes with the flame. Asterisk, here is the widely accepted truth. Every candle, no matter how finely made or carefully measured, dies in the end. No groove can outmuscle the inevitability of wick against wax. But here's the quirk. In this empire, people sometimes collected the last stub of an imperial candle. They treated it as a relic, a token imbued with the hour it carried to completion. Imagine someone storing a knob of wax and declaring, "This stub witnessed the end of a treaty's signing, or of a feast that soared into dawn." The wax may vanish when burned, but even its leftovers became history. Asterisk, the Emperor leans close now, face lit with a glow that softens his sharp lines into something strangely human, less ruler, more dreamer. You wonder, does he believe he has truly tamed time? Or is this private philosophy a small comfort in the dark, pretending his empire runs in step with melting beeswax? Historians still wondered. Rulers see their devices as scientific triumphs, or simply as poetic illusions to steady their reigns. Asterisk, the flame is lower. The walls hum with nothing but silence, punctuated by a faint hiss as the wax hits metal tray. Shadows reach long and thin, curling like old cats across the embroidered curtains. You breathe slowly. The air tastes faintly sweet beeswax mixed with wood smoke, as if the room itself is sighing one last time. Asterisk, in its final stretch, the candle shakes slightly, like a tired performer giving a last bow. The Emperor exhales, folding his hands, content with the ending. You find yourself drawn into the same rhythm. You can almost hear the hours themselves giving way with each faint crackle. The flame throws one wild flare, as if resisting its fate, then sputters back to quiet. Asterisk, at last, it falters. A final shiver, a curl of smoke thin as hair, and darkness folds over the room. The groove-marked pillar is now nothing but a stub of cooled wax, steam rising faintly as if its soul lingers in the air. Asterisk, and in the stillness, you feel no loss, only calm, because the slower you breathe, the more it makes sense. Hours are not cages. They are candles meant to burn, to offer light, to warm your table, to guide your eyes across a scroll, or your laughter through a banquet, and then to end, gently, naturally. Asterisk, the Emperor quietly rises, disappearing into shadow. You sit still a moment longer, letting your own body sink into the velvet hush. Then you rise too, not to measure, not to argue accuracy, but to let the last warmth of the flame carry you softly forward, hourless and free. Asterisk, word count, 1133. Asterisk, wind down closing passage, approximately 300 words. Asterisk, and now. The story fades, the flame exhausted, the Emperor long asleep. What remains is only you, your breath, your pulse, your steady presence in this darkened chamber of imagination. Notice how your chest rises and falls. There's no rush here, no grooves to meet, no minutes waiting anxiously, just the slow rhythm of your body, as natural as dripping wax. Asterisk, picture a single candle still glowing faintly in the distance, not to mark time, but to guide your mind into rest. Its flame is gentle, shimmering without effort, stretching shadows into a soft, endless horizon. It doesn't demand anything. Instead, it comforts. The longer you gaze, the more your own thoughts begin to melt, pooling into stillness the way wax gathers and cools at the base of a candle. Asterisk, the room around you is quiet. In that quiet, you feel safe. Imagine the walls softened into faint glowing curves, as though the world itself has become rounded and warm. The air hums with a barely there sweetness, like honey drifting on the edges of a dream. Asterisk, your eyelids grow heavier. Your breaths grow longer. You are slipping into the space between flame and shadow, where hours no longer hurry, where time has no grooves. Here, there is only comfort, only hush. Asterisk, so let the last of the wax burn away inside your mind, leaving not anxiety, but calm. Let the smoke drift and vanish, while you sink deeper, slower, toward rest. The flame has bowed. Everything is safe. Everything is still. Time belongs to no one. It has gone soft, gone hushed, gone quiet. And now, so can you.